You know, this is probably one of the most interesting topics for a panel discussion that I've encountered for a while. I just want to tell you a little bit about how this thing came about, because it's a subject that's really close to my heart, and it's been interesting that something like this really hasn't happened here at the festival before. In all the years that we've been running the festival here, talking about something local like this is really a difference. And it came about in a great way. That this summer, I was up with a friend on Assiniboine, and I came back down to the Hind Hut and ran into Steve Holeczi, the person in the far end of the panel here. And he and his partner, Dana Ruddy, had just completed a big new route on the northeast face of Assiniboine. And we were sitting there talking at the hut, and he happened to ask what was going to be happening at the festival this year. And I told him about some of the proposals for the panels that were set up already. And with all due respect to the panel that's going to be happening tomorrow, the first thing that he said was, "Oh, not Everest again." Because, you know, in reality, I think for a lot of people that come to these things, you know, as much as the draw of the big peaks and the big dangerous topics is really exciting, it doesn't necessarily resonate at a very personal level for a lot of people. So I asked Steve and Dana what they would suggest instead, and their answer, a little bit bluer than I'm about to say it, was basically, you know, what about the Rockies? What about this place? This place is so cool. It's such a great place to come climbing. Why don't we talk about that? And then they kept on going on then about, you know, how we could get all these different people who could come in, and there's all kinds of people with really harsh opinions, and they think that Everest is bullshit, and they don't want to hear anything about that. There's just so much more important and real things that go on around here. And I bought into it totally at that point, and the more that I thought about it, the more that I really said, you know, yeah, there's something that's really, really true about that. But at the same time, it's really, really hard for people to talk about their own areas sometimes, because in an ironic sense, sometimes you know a lot more about places that are further away. You get news from a distance, and it kind of hits you a little bit harder, whereas you take the home kinds of things a little bit more for granted. So right from the very beginning, it's been an interesting process trying to define what do we want this thing to be about today, what are we really going to be talking about. And one of the unique things that we're going to be talking about up here today is exactly what makes up the character of Rockies climbing, and in particular Rockies alpinism. And over the last couple of days here at the festival, I've pulled some folks aside who come from far away and just asking them some opinions about this place, but also got some thoughts from some preeminent locals about, you know, what is there about this place? Because a lot of climbers have an idea in their head about what the Canadian Rockies are all about. And I just wanted to share a couple of those things with you that I'm sure will come up in the conversation today. One of the first people that I talked to was Tim Odger, who's a hugely known park rescue warden here, and very, very talented climber who's done a lot of stuff around here. And he said exactly what everybody seemed to say, that the unique character of the Rockies absolutely has something to do with Choss, that it's about these garbage heaps that we have right here. So I asked him what he meant by that, and he said his first description was, well, you have to understand that the Rockies are way over on the left of the shit scale. And I said, well, so that's not really an explanation why people would come. And he said, no, it's really important to understand that they're so bad that it's just so completely wonderful and addictive when they're even just the tiniest little bit good. And then he added that, and of course there's always that quartzite. We're always looking around for you run onto just an absolute pile of crap. You run into this midway band of quartzite where the rock is really fantastic, but of course there's so little of that around here that doesn't really explain why people go. And he says, no, because you're always looking for that. You're just always, you're going to find that, and that's the whole reason to do a 2,000 meter face is you're going to find 50 feet of quartzite right in the middle. And then he said, of course, there's also the thing that even visitors who come here have a masochistic pride, because you can always walk away from the Rockies saying, A, hopefully I survived, and B, I did it and I felt really good. And I showed the world that I could do something that's absolutely world class, because it's utterly terrifying to do things here. Mark Wilford said something a few years ago that I thought really kind of captures a visitor's point of view, and that was that he wrote a phrase saying, the Rockies, to him, were sewage held together by gravity and ill will. And the great American climber George Lowe came up here and just, kind of shot through a number of the great faces of this range and really defined what hard Rockies alpinism was all about. Himself wrote that the Rockies are a bad drug that I just can't help but being addicted to. And I think the sum of that is we've got a range here that's got some pretty amazing potential. It's got some fantastic routes, but it's got some very, very unique challenges that define what Rockies climbing is all about. And I'm just going to turn to Barry for a second here now, and just maybe have you give us an explanation, because you know this range probably as well as anybody else in the world, just a sense of when we're talking about Rockies alpinism, what are we talking about here?
I've kind of defined that in my own mind. It holds true for anywhere on the globe, and that is climbing the big glaciated peaks by their steep and technical faces. So, country that you need a rope and, you're in danger of falling because of having your fingers fail because it's so steep that, you need full climbing techniques to get up it. And for the Rockies, it's interesting to me that a lot of the quotes were from guys who've been active in the range in the summer, and I would echo a lot of those quotes, but I think I'll advance that there's quite a change in quality of the experience going in winter when the big shale bands that are often the most problematic, you're trying to pull up on stacked LPs or stacked, books that just come off in your hands, and you've got to make that transition from the steep limestone, which may be pretty good, into that belly flop onto the 45-degree shingles. Without nails in the shingle, so they all want to come down on you. But those ledges may be covered in 45 degrees of snow in the wintertime, and the quality of the experience can be a lot better, and the mountain can be locked up in frost. So I've often found just right across the board, the quality in the winter is better, even though, overall the complexity of the undertaking is probably a lot more.
Okay. I realized I hadn't really introduced everybody on the panel. I turned to Barry because I'm assuming most people in the audience know Barry and his record of hugely significant ascents in this range and lots of others. But I'll just I'll go through the other people in the panel really quickly right now. Steve Holeczi, who's the person who suggested the idea of the panel, is a local mountain guide and somebody who's really been getting out there among the hills here and has over the last few years has put up some very, very significant first ascents on really complicated routes here and certainly world-class kind of climbs. To Steve's right is Sean Isaac, who most of you probably know as a guidebook author to mixed climbing, and certainly has contributed lots of stories to journals and magazines around the world, and has just recently taken over what is probably the most important editorial position in the entire world, the Canadian Alpine Journal. In all modesty, I said. And to my left is Raphael Slawinski, who is a Calgarian who's been probably one of the very most active people in the hard alpine world here in the Rockies in the past several years, contributing huge ascents, and has also spent a lot of time in other ranges of the world, so certainly knows of which he speaks when he measures what the Rockies are all about. Sean, when we were talking backstage, you had kind of a rejoinder to Barry's idea of what alpinism is all about from the point of view of other people. Could you just explain what you meant by that?
Sure, yeah. I think a lot of our American friends to the south and European friends across the big pond consider alpine climbing. Well, I know they do. Alpine climbing happens in the alpine, above tree line. So to them, they come up here, Yamniska, big rock face on the way up to Calgary, Stanley Headwall, and Kootenay National Park. To them, that's alpine climbing because it's in the alpine. To us, that's kind of cragging, and I think we'll all agree with that. It's multi-pitch cragging. And for us, alpinism, I think, is not really geographically where it is. It's more of a style thing, how you approach the mountains, how you look at them, just kind of how you want to climb them. And I think we all agree that we kind of approach climbing, different levels of commitment and seriousness, but we approach it to have fun, to enjoy the mountains, to go with one or two friends and climb them in good style. And style, again, that's all relative.
So I wonder if any of you could kind of hop in and just give a thumbnail sketch of your own perspectives of what hard climbing, what alpine climbing in the Rockies is all about. Just any experiences that you might have, or recent things that you've encountered that's defining what Rockies climbing is all about today.
Well, I think it's a lot to do with your buddies too. It's just big adventure. You get your balls into your abdomen. Crossing the rivers, and it's a lot of times it's a big shit show. But the whole thing about it is when it actually comes together, which isn't that often. Usually on the big things here, that it is really special. And there's a lot. I think Rockies is quite a dangerous place to climb if you're looking at a lot of the big alpine climbs, but it's very rewarding too. So I think that the comments that were said to begin with, the sewage and all that kind of stuff, it really is true. It's an obsession. It's kind of like heroin, I guess.
It takes a lot of commitment, and I mean, Steve's been out all fall trying to alpine climb. Steve, how many times have you been out trying new routes this fall?
Next question.
How many have you gotten up?
Next question. But I don't bring a bolt gun up there too, so that's the big difference as well.
But yeah, I think touche.
But yeah, just come back to Steve's point. I think alpine climbing in the Rockies, more than geographical location, what defines is the complication of it. And I mean, with global warming, the ice will be gone anyway. So does it mean there won't be alpine climbing in the Rockies in 50 years? I don't think so. I think there will be. But yeah, it's just the amount of complication that goes into an ascent. The fact that you don't know if you'll find an anchor at the end of a pitch, and often it'll take you an hour and a half to get an anchor that you're happy to hang your and your partner's ass off of. And I think that's a big. I think that's what leads to this kind of love-hate relationship we have with Rockies climbing. Is at the time you kind of don't want to be there, but when it's done, you kind of think, hey, that was pretty cool, and you want to do it again.
I think the best quote I ever heard was, in order to be a good alpinist, you need a short-term memory.
And you have to be an optimist. But yeah, it's interesting to me that the range is quite wild. It's not a tame range. Like if you climbed in the Alps, you're used to quite a lot of comfort and quite a lot of accessibility. But the Rockies are really wild, and that seems to affect the imagination. I mean, I can't probably do this as good as Raphael can, but I can pretty much construct Mount Alberta in my head. There's not much about that mountain I don't know. Yet Mount Robson, still the top of the Emperor Face, is cloaked in mystery for me. I can't bring it up in my mind. And it has to do with being back there when there's no one else around. It's winter, it's quiet. It really is on that side off the road. And it's big country. It's northern. It's like so much of what Canada occupies in the international, or the international mind space, that we're northern. We're way north. We're wild country. And I love that mystery. I find that mystery just intoxicating and attractive, and never kind of fatigue of all the effort and suffering and fear and everything that has to go into it to get up to see what those last couple pitches are like.
I wonder if one of you could kind of paint a picture for the audience about what we're talking about. What's a classic kind of alpine route in the Rockies all about?
Classic is maybe a word that should be used carefully here.
Well, it's something that's been done by more than two people is classic in the Rockies.
Go for it, Raph. That's you, buddy.
I just blanked, so I can't.
Exactly.
I think everyone's seen the north face of Mount Temple from Lake Louise. I would consider that to be, there's a number of routes on the face. A lot of them would fall into the category of classic. I'll be a little selective in that I don't want to pick one in the center of the face that lies under the threat of Serac Fall and might be the last classic you ever do. But there's a route that Raphael's done over on the left called the Sphinx Face that I went at 3 times in the 80s, never got up, never cracked that last couple pitches of mystery, went the wrong way. But, if you're looking from Lake Louise Ski Hill, you look over, the face is around the magnitude of 5,000 feet from Lake Annette to the summit. So it's big. It's a vertical mile. There's a lot of steep and overhanging rock. There's glacier, there's ice runnels, there's snow. It's the whole meal deal. So the Sphinx Face, you start off with a quartzite pitch that's really nice, 5-6 climbing, but it's really good quality climbing. You get into a snow and ice couloir that'll lead you up to some more classic alpine climbing after several thousand feet of gain. Then you'll get into some very serious limestone chimney climbing, very serious at a certain ledge where I know I had 11 pieces in trying to get an anchor and had my body weight leaning into the mountain so my buddy could Jumar. And I wanted him Jumaring off my waist and not off the anchor. And that's part of the Rockies experience. That's part of the, to come and have it come together and work is pretty cool.
And classic's a relative term too, right? I mean, oftentimes we see photos of classic alpine climbing, splitter granite cracks, nice narrow plastic ice runnels with good gear on the side. Here you got to kind of adjust your thinking of what classic is. Here it's pretty much like, I think it was Barry that said, or Tim Osher, that was your quote, you're looking for that little bit of classic climbing, but if you take the whole package, I mean, we've learned to embrace snow-covered dry tooling, and here we have lots of limestone. It lends itself to that kind of climbing, so the term classic's definitely relative. Here it's more has to do with the big picture, the big face, and climbing over things with maybe not the splitter gear that you're going to get on granite.
Yeah, I think usually classics associated with maybe like marginally safe, and I think that the Rockies, I think the experience is probably not that safe, and that's what people are attracted to, actually.
And no other range few other ranges do you see the alpinist advancing with 8 knife blades on his gear rack, and such an intimate understanding of the knife blade that he sleeps with it under his pillow in his sleeping bag.
It is a mistress.
Learn to love the knife blade. Piton, sorry, I'm talking about a very, very sharp piton that looks like a knife blade. Sorry.
I remember once Barry once commenting he was going off to the Alps and he said it was like taking a holiday. And I found myself thinking of that this spring. I was up in Alaska, and the faces were big, but it was like a holiday. There were good cracks everywhere. There was good ice everywhere. Digging under a big overhanging cornice in the Rockies, you could keep digging forever. You wouldn't get anywhere. There, after a meter of snow, you get to solid blue ice. It felt like cheating.
And it is.
So yeah, I mean, it takes more than just skill and experience here. You have to be willing to commit and go for it. It's definitely hard climbing here, and I guess that's why I've never been able to step up to the plate and get something good done here.
In a word, stupid.
Yeah, it just makes it sound really ridiculous. Hey, you guys are idiots.
I did a route with Rolando Garibaldi, a really talented climber who has climbed a lot around the world, in Constellation Valley on Mount Fay, and it was his first time climbing in the Rockies, and he spent an hour and a half getting an anchor. And when Steve House, the other climbing partner, and I got up to him, he said, "I don't know, maybe it is worth it just to have a couple bolts because it would only be 15 minutes." And we're like, "No, we will not have any bolts." So yeah, we were trying to imbue him with our sense of style and commitment that, you got to spend the hour and a half and dig around and clear away several square meters of snow from the wall, some of which may be a meter deep, to find enough little features that you can put your gubbins into and come up with something that'll hold.
At least mentally. Yeah.
I mean, just to maybe disagree slightly here, as much as I appreciate that vision that you put these limits on yourself, that you won't bring the technology to bring the mountain down to your level, as bolts often do, at the same time, I think that are we stuck in the past with that? And a lot of the time you look at really good European climbers and they don't have a problem embracing maybe a few bolts. Are they necessarily a bad thing? I don't know.
I think it's an interesting question because the bolt opens up steep and blank faces, stuff that really don't have any featuring that any modern technology will fit into. No pitons, no chocks, no cams. So suddenly you can go out on blank faces. And restricting yourself to the piton, in a sense, keeps you on the more natural line of the mountain. And I've dug that. If I can't do it with pitons, I just don't do it. And it keeps you in crack lines and keeps you on features. And it may restrict, I guess, eventually how hard you climb, but I don't think it restricts how much adventure you have. And I probably put more value on the adventure quotient than how technically hard I'm climbing.
Right. Well, sometimes people turn to bolts because it's a way of opening up the terrain that just isn't accessible otherwise, because maybe it's all been climbed out. But I wonder what would you guys think about that? Is it true that the natural lines have been so well plumbed out here that we need to think about other things, or is there still that much more left to do here?
There's definitely a lot of natural lines left to do, but I think the willingness to go out there and find them, because it is big adventure, I think it's picking up now, but it has been kind of lacking. But I think that the whole mixed climbing craze, where people were bolting, big roofs, has kept the same ethic here, because now those people know they can do those moves because they've practiced them safely, and now they're taking that to the mountains without the bolts. So there's different perception there, I think.
No, and I'm being a bit of a devil's advocate here, because in many ways I fully agree with Barry that in some ways the best thing you can do is leave the bolt kit behind, because then a lot of the time you will find you can get by without it. Whereas if you had it on the back of your harness, it'd be so easy to reach for it and pound the bolt in, rather than spend the hour and a half digging for some shitty anchor. So no, I do fully agree with that. At the same time, I don't think we should be fully dogmatic about that. It's I think we should keep an open mind about those things. And I remember actually talking to Rollo. I don't want to blame Rollo don't want to blame this on Rollo without Rollo being here, but I'll do that. That Rollo, being a rock climber, had that perspective that it's not all black and white. Maybe there are all shades of gray.
There was a route done in Alaska by Sean Easton and Uli Steck that I was just incredibly impressed with. It's called Blood from a Stone, and it's this sweeping monolithic granite with this 1 6-inch seam of perfect white snow and ice. When I say ice, everyone thinks, you can ice climb, but this is unconsolidated stuff that we call snice. It's halfway snow and halfway ice, and it's very, very tricky to climb. And indeed, you clear that out, and there's a compact corner there that won't take anything. And they had a limited number of light aluminum hand drive bolts. And I remember reading about Uli being halfway up a pitch and just saying that I have to stop and drill. I can't go any farther without stopping and drilling. And I don't know, for different, probably wouldn't be a route I'd get to climb, because I'd probably still stay in my little world and not take the bolt kit. But man, it was a beautiful looking line. It looked so fabulous. I think it was a great climb. So, bravo to those guys. But yeah.
Yeah, and
now that the bolts are there, I can go there.
That's not to judge other people, but I think for a lot of people around here, I think the ideal is not to. Whether we need to change that or not, who cares really? But I'm going to stick in my world as well.
It matters. We do care.
Huh? Well, let's focus for a second, if we can, just on kind of where we are right now. Because one of the questions that I had after the conversation that Steve and Dana had at the beginning was just, it seems to me like there's a change going on in Rockies alpinism right now. That there was a lull that happened sometime around the 1990s that seemed to be associated with the real developing advent of sport climbing, and then much more extreme, difficult ice climbing, and then certainly mixed climbing evolved. But it seemed for quite a while there, in the 1990s, there just weren't many significant things being done in the alpine world, and now it seems like that's changed. Am I wrong about that, or do you think things actually have kind of kicked in?
Yeah, well, I think like when I first moved here in '98 with Eamon Walsh, he's like one of the most prominent alpine climbers now, and we were saying like all the stories we ever had were from the 70s and 80s and not the 90s, and we were at 99. So I kind of feel that now there's this obsession has come back. It's not that it's any more than it was, but it's actually come back to the Rockies, and I think that's pretty neat. There's a core group of individuals that are addicted to heroin, basically. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I think there was a void in the 90s. I came out in the early 90s, and when I came out, people just weren't winter alpine climbing. The focus was on waterfall climbing, then mixed climbing, and I think the 90s were an age of specialization. Everybody was a boulder or a sport climber. Now people seem to do everything. I mean, at this table, Raphael has mastered all forms of Rockies climbing, right? Everybody who Steve's talking about in this core group of people out trying to alpine climb in the Rockies, they do everything. They go bouldering, sport climbing, climb on Yam. They do it all, and I think you need all those skills in order to survive here in the Rockies.
Yeah, who are those guys, John? Just to kind of acknowledge some of the people who aren't at the table here.
Rob in the audience here would be one. Mike Verway, Dana Rudy, Eamon Walsh, Ian Wilstead. List goes on and on. You got more?
Scott Semple, Johnny Walsh, got to put in Johnny Red, man. Chris
The G-Town
Brazo.
boys.
Chris Brazo, the scared horse. Yeah.
Yeah, Eric Dumarac, Valerie Babanov, Pat Delaney, Corey Richards. Yeah, so from my perspective, having been climbing in the range since the early 80s, I kind of inherited or stepped into a ladder that had started in the 60s, and really hard alpine climbing in the Rockies started about 65 with the first ascent of the northeast face of Mount Kefren by Eastern American climbers. And the next year, Brian Greenwood and Charlie Locke went and did a route on the north face of Temple. And it's interesting that for a lot of Greenwood's career while he was climbing hard, he didn't have any partners. He was so much better than anyone else locally that really he had people who would sign on and belay for him. And then, you have a group of maybe 4 or 5 really psyched individuals like John Laughlin and Jim Elzinga and James Blench and Dwayne Congdon, who try to take this game and expand on it and take it into winter, but there's only 4 of them. And then in the early 80s, there's myself, having climbed with Elzinga, who I can go out with Kevin Doyle, James Blanch, and who else? David Cheeseman. And there's 4 of us, 4 or 5 of us, and it's a really small pool. Then in the 90s, a whole generation kind of went sport climbing and didn't get into it, and there was a big void. But now it's really exciting. We just listed a dozen guys who are just, as in, the battle cry is, let's go get amongst. And they are getting amongst. And there's some really cool things being done, and the amount of energy that's in the big mountains is, in Western Canada, unprecedented. There's just there's a dozen guys really going for it. So there he is, a renaissance.
But I also think that not much is getting done, in a sense that the bigger adventures aren't getting done as often. Maybe it's just for the fact that, it's really bad snowpack, bad rock. You're always waiting for the weather, which never really happens. But, I think that maybe we do need a kick in the ass, in a sense, to get out there and do some of the bigger things. So a lot of these big cragging routes, cragging being a kind of a different term, but the bigger stuff isn't getting done that often. And
what's that kick in the ass going to be?
Maybe, just watching a couple of European climbers climb yesterday. Maybe, there's going to be a question that comes up a little later maybe, but we're also talking about, Europeans don't really know this area as far as, or foreigners, besides a handful, don't really know this area as an alpine climbing destination. So as that increases, how much is that going to affect how we go out there as well? I think a lot more will get done once they figure that out. And they will.
Kicking off on your point, Steve, I think the perception might be that people live here climbing the Rockies, but to do the real stuff, they go off to Patagonia or Pakistan, places like that. So Alaska. So is it true that it's just a training range, that the stuff done here is, it's nice, but it's not terribly significant, whatever significant might mean?
I think many of the most powerful mountain experience I've had have been in the Rockies. And I've climbed a lot of other places, but at the end of the day, when you sum up the experience inside your own heart and your own head, the Rockies, especially in winter, have been a really magic range. And I like to, there's a young guy from Colorado, Scott DiCaprio, and it used to be said that the Rockies were a good training range for Alaska, and he went to both ranges and he came back and said, you guys are nuts, man. Alaska is a good training range for this range.
And I think that's been true in a lot of ways. In the last little while, you've seen some people who have been gaining a lot of tremendous experience elsewhere and have come back here and have found routes, like I'm thinking about Steve House and Marco Prejol on North Twin. That's kind of the high point for some people like that to come here and do routes of that kind of caliber. Raphael, you've been really strong about saying, I think, that this home base for you is the equal of any place that you've ever been before.
Yeah, I don't know how objective that is, but having climbed Alaska, having climbed Pakistan, sometimes it feels like the experience I had there were not any more intense. The routes I did, well, I actually didn't get up much. I just tried stuff. But the routes I tried didn't feel like they were any more significant than the occasional rare success you get here. And I think it's just this, it's familiarity breeds contempt. We kind of look at our own range, it's our own backyard, so it's not a big deal. And the real stuff happens elsewhere. But I don't think that's always true.
Yeah, I mean, I came out here 15 years ago because I thought this was paradise, Not white sandy beaches, but white snowy mountains. And then I got distracted by traveling around the world and checking out other places. Now I'm kind of grounded here, got a family, and I just kind of like, wow, I'm glad. There's lots to do here. I don't need to go anywhere else. I can have big adventure in my own backyard on a long weekend.
But I also want to ask, why aren't we getting up bigger things here in the Rockies like that often?
Or aren't we?
Well, I don't know. I don't think we are.
But look, in the last couple of years, there's been at least a couple of bigger things done each year. I mean, that's huge. Two climbs a year?
No.
For the Rockies,
Prodigious. And when we're talking about big rigs, we're talking about some of the faces that have the most relief in the range. Faces like the east face of Mount Assiniboine, north face of Temple. Up at the Columbia Icefields, there's a number of these faces, like the north face of North Twin and the faces on Mount Alberta, the Emperor face on Mount Robson. I believe that there's probably other faces of equal magnitude in the range that we hunters, and I say that with the most respect, we don't know about, but we need to go get Glenn Bowles, get him to open his photo library and show us pictures of faces that he has seen every season, every time of the day, and from every angle. And I believe there's more in our range, because we only deal in the center part of the range, and the range is 1,000 kilometers long. So, big rigs, there was another thought there. To succeed on big rigs, you have to try big rigs. And I think there's, going back to Steve House and Marco Prezel on the north face of North Twin in April of 2004, it's interesting that Steve House largely learned a lot about alpine climbing in the Rockies, and he has done a heck of a lot of alpine climbing here. He had a huge mythological barrier to North Twin because it had a big myth in his mind around it. Marco Prezel, who came from Slovenia and knew a little bit about it but didn't know, wasn't influenced by the same mythology, came over Woolly's shoulder and looked, and he goes, "Oh, it's a nice beast." And Steve pointed out that the Slovenian word he used for beast wasn't a big, charging tiger. It was a nice little kitten, It's a friendly little beast. And they went off and had a grand adventure. But I think, our mythology and that can hold you back. And to succeed on big rigs, you have to go try them.
But I wonder, Steve, going back to your point, the idea that we haven't gone into the backcountry to do some of the bigger things that are probably out there, as Barry is saying, if one of the reasons why we're still doing some of the things that we know about is because at this point, if we understand that there maybe was a lull in the 1990s, now people are getting back at it again, that we're going to do the things closer to the road first, but it's a progression towards exactly what you're talking about. Do you buy that maybe that's going to happen soon?
Yeah, I think a lot of the trend now too is fast and light, and I think some certain faces like north face of Alberta maybe lend themselves to that, but a lot of the Rockies isn't like that. It takes a lot of effort, and you can't go that fast and light. You have to have a hard work ethic, I think, as well. And so I think a lot of times maybe we not quite lazy, but we go for the things where we can that style suits itself. And I don't know if you guys agree with that, but
I think it's a good point, because I think we often, in climbing, we become dogmatic about certain styles. And so right now the big sexy thing is fast and light single push. It doesn't refer to bowel movements, it refers to climbing. And climbers are big on toilet humor too, so get used to it. But I fully agree with you, Steve, that there are faces in the Rockies that get done that way, and some faces that, at least in my mind, I mean, maybe I'll have my mind blown away by someone, but some faces just don't. And I think if we get trapped in the single ethic, then they won't get done.
so maybe it's a renaissance in the work ethic here. I think people are willing to actually put some work in to do these things.
Yeah.
It is climbing we're talking about, not work.
Huh?
So I certainly agree. I think that there's been a change that's been going on, and I want to go back to Steve, to your question about what's it going to take to do the next big step in here. Any thoughts from any of you guys about what's out there and what people are going to have to do as a shift in attitude or a willingness to commit to get on some of the bigger things?
I think it's happening. I mean, you know, guys are going out and trying things and having success. There's definitely, you know, a number of places where the lines could possibly get filled in. There's a lot of terrain between the low route and our route on North Twin. There's a whole concave face that begs for a directissima that, you know, maybe what we saw from their ascent of North Twin with guys going in there in winter conditions and dry tooling up big, massive blank looking limestone walls is the way forward. And then I think some research, just looking at pictures and trying to figure out where lines are. There's definitely a lot of terrain between the infinite patience on the Emperor and the House Haley route that just got put up recently. Yeah.
I think it just takes a lot of free time. You need to have a lot of time on your hands because just to get the conditions right to do these things. I mean, you need to not have a job, not have a family, and just be hanging out and doing whatever. Then when the conditions are right, go for it. Because that's the main thing. I mean, you might only get those conditions a couple times a year for a few days at a time.
Mm-hmm. So can you, in terms of what you know about the world's perceptions of this place right now, one of the things we've talked about is, you know, how much influence it could be helpful now of having international climbers come here. What do people know about this place at this point?
I think they mainly think of the Rockies as I mean, when you talk to European climbers, they're like, oh, great ice climbing, great mixed climbing. But they don't really think of our mountains as much, you know. They're not very, I don't know. In our mind, they're quite big and prestigious. A lot of people, though, they want summits like Patagonia, big shapely spires, right? Ours are kind of these big dark blobs, right, covered in snow. So I think they lack a bit of glory, but then when people get used to it, like Raphael said, you know, you get an appreciation for that style of climbing and the adventure aspect of it, which we have here.
I think there's cognoscenti internationally too, because my friend Philippe Pellet from Briançon, you know, who has put up some big routes in this range, you know, fully is aware of the range. And his quote to me on top of Robson was, I look north and I could see a lifetime of ascents. I will come back, you know, and he does. He comes back. And another buddy of his, Christophe Moulin, an incredible climber, he told me, you know, the north face of Alberta in winter, it's like a grail for me. It's the grail.
But I think, you know, back to Barry's point with Marco Prezel's coming, you know, looking at it as a piece of terrain rather than a myth, I think that, you know, that's what they do too. They come over here and they look at a piece of terrain that looks like a good line, let's go climb it. Right? Whereas we sit around and go, oh my God, we've heard all the stories, we've seen, you know, it's just like, oh my God.
But we can do the same in the Alps. We can go to the Alps and, you know, it happens. You're like, wow, that looks really cool.
Yeah, but I can do that in a hut, right, with a beer, and that's like much more inviting than.
Speaking of beer, where's the organizers?
Yeah, we definitely get bogged down with baggage here too. I mean, we know what the snow conditions can be like. We know what the rock can be like, you know, so we kind of, I think, scare ourselves a bit. I know I do, even before we get out there.
Yeah, it's a bit like, you know, when you're first coming of age, you go out and drink a lot, then you realize it really hurts the following morning. And so it's kind of like alpine climbing in the Rockies, a bit like that you go out a few times and you realize just how much it hurts. And then after a while, it takes, you know, you're trying to psych yourself up for a climb and you have to get over that barrier that you know how much it's going to hurt.
I love getting drunk.
I hurt, therefore I am. Yeah. It doesn't have to be fun to be fun. Yeah. Optimist with a short memory.
Yeah.
So what would you guys think about trying to promote this place a little bit more? Like, I know right now there's a real change in the way that people are looking at this place, even just because things are getting out there onto the internet very quickly. There's some media coverage of some of the bigger routes that are being done, ironically, more by people that come and visit this place than you guys doing it yourselves. Do you think this would make sense to try and push this, or do we want to keep on having the Rockies be this secret little paradise?
Well, I mean, it's not that secret if we're having a panel, but I don't really want to push people into coming here. I think that we just need to realize that it's a great place, and maybe we need to get unstuck from some of the dogmas that we have, basically.
Yeah.
I think visiting climbers, we see this in our guiding culture, that exchange of information, ideas, and different ways of approach is nothing but profitable in the end. And it advances. Everyone grows because of it. But I never want to see the Rockies with cows underneath North Twin. I want grizzly bears there. I want them for the rest of the, as long as our species exists, I want grizzly bears beneath North Twin.
I know one of the most interesting things that happens every year at this festival is listening to some of the folks who come from away, and they end up, I just spoke to Thomas Heinrich, who was on stage last night with Christoph Halicki. He got driven out to the Banff Jasper Highway a couple of days ago, and when I was talking to him this morning, he was just saying, this is unbelievable, and he's never heard of this place before. But I'm wondering, go back to your point, Steve, in a sense, sure, we don't want to give away the secret, but at the same time, wouldn't something like Barry is saying, wouldn't people coming here and really kind of upping the ante, wouldn't that really help this place in a lot of ways?
Oh yeah, and I think climbers that come over, I think it's great. What I'm saying is, I don't think we need to advertise it through media and all this kind of stuff, through articles and that kind of thing. Yeah, all the European climbers that come over, they're totally psyched to climb, and I'm in awe of some of the climbers I see come over here. So it can only better it that way. But yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah.
So what's out there right now? Not to necessarily have you guys give away your great big next projects, but what's out there that you're thinking of as, if you say when Philippe looks north from Robson Barry, what kinds of things is he seeing that are really opening his eyes?
The north face of Whitehorn screams for a route. It really does, and it's right across from Robson. I think, the north face of the North Goodster Tower is a very interesting piece of geography in our range that has one of the biggest reliefs in our range. I have mentioned the Emperor. I think there's, I'd love to see someone go investigate it. Probably won't be me, but go investigate the center part of North Twin. I don't know. Those are some ideas. We need Glenn Bowles to come up.
So are you saying, Barry, that the future of the range is in the winter?
I lean towards winter. I have done, my share of summer climbing in the range, but our ascent of Robson by Infinite Patience, named that because I had started out 7 times to do the route over a decade and only got on the mountain 3 or 4 times. But it was just such a quality line. Everything about it was good. The ice was good. The rock was good. It wasn't, you wouldn't coin it a Rockies route. There wasn't tons of choss. It was just good climbing the whole way, and it wasn't that hard. The hardest pitch was right at the beginning, a new water ice pitch, and otherwise it was kind of 5.9, but it just went on forever, and it just was beautiful terrain. And it was winter. It would not be the same experience in summer, of course. It would be a terrible place to go. You'd have your life taken from you by a fallen rock just getting up to it. So, yeah, I think winter has more adventure, more commitment, better quality. I'll stand on that.
But in some ways, we do stuff in winter too because it's, because it's harder. It'd be sort of just like the next frontier of waterfall climbing might be climbing the Weeping Wall in summer. It makes it about as much sense as climbing the Greenwood Loch or the North Twin in winter, wouldn't you say?
No, I wouldn't. I have done the Greenwood Loch in summer, and it's a great, quick route in rock shoes. But in winter, I don't know, it's a big, huge adventure. And it's an adventure in summer, but it's a one-day adventure. It's a grade 4 adventure. In winter, it's a grade 6 adventure. And I, put a lot of value on that.
I also think, maybe some summer routes, though, can be, we're talking about style. And some of the bigger routes, I think, we talk about freeing routes, doing climbs without aid climbing, which I think is a big step also. And I think that can be fairly committing, right? It might be a completely different experience in aid climbing. So I think some summer adventures can be equally as, gnarly.
And I think winter makes a little more sense too from a hazard management perspective. Our biggest hazard here is rockfall. In winter, sure, you have the snow, you have this dealing with the cold, but once you understand that stuff, you can deal with it, and you don't have the rockfall.
No, having done some personal avalanche control last winter, I beg to differ here.
You learn how to swim.
Like I said, once you understand the snow, then it's a lot less hazardous.
Yeah, but usually understanding means you just don't go out of your house.
It's nice that Raph's here, well, that we're all here, but he went for a 50-meter ride last year going up to an ice climb, so that's quite a scary experience. 200 meter. Well, I sell you short.
What's the difference? Yeah.
You have to sympathize with European climbers coming over here in the heart of the winter because we do not have a deep maritime snowpack, which leads to stability in a snowpack. We have a shallow continental snowpack, which leads to instability. And really, if you've grown up on the coast or in the European Alps, you look at, if you dig through the snowpack, it probably doesn't make sense. Like, why is it even sitting there? So, yeah, it's a challenge.
I just want to invite anybody that's got questions up to the microphones here. If you just make your way up there, and I'll try and see you in the lights over there, that'd be great. And ask questions of any of the panel members, for sure, or all of them together. You know, one of the questions I think that's bound to come up in a situation like this, I think that, you guys have already identified that we probably haven't peaked in the Rockies yet, if you will. There's still lots more left to be done here. But what's it going to take? What's the change that has to happen for people to be able to get onto this stuff? Or maybe even another kind of question would be, if you had some advice to give aspiring Rockies alpinists at this point who want to get out there and do some of the kind of routes that you guys have done, what do they have to do to get there?
First of all, just to go back a sec, not even sure if we even changed that much in the first place. And one good example would be, Rob, you said it to me, your Mike ascent of Kefren, Wild Thing. Rob Owens there and Mike Verway did the third ascent of Barry's route on Mount Kefren, a winter route. Barry did it, 20 years ago?
87, yeah, 20 years.
20 years ago. The second ascent was 10 years after that. The third ascent was 10 years after that. And Rob's words to me was like, wow, 20 years, third ascent, and we did in the exact same style and exact same length of time.
But
Correct, Rob? That's what you said?
there's a fourth ascent. Kevin Thaw did it with his girlfriend. He did. Kevin Thaw did it with his girlfriend. He led every pitch, took 3 days, and basically same track record. But I think on that face, the crux of the route that we climbed on aid has been largely climbed with dry tooling and mixed climbing techniques, I think with just 1 point of aid, so that's an improvement. And I think nothing has to change. I think things are getting done. I mean, Johnny Red and Chris Brazeau out on the north face of Alberta, even though myself, I don't like climbing under seracs, it was a magnificent effort. Something that was done in a day that my generation of alpinists never considered. It was always a multi-day route, and we never even went at it as a day route. So that's a huge amount of progress right there. Yeah.
I know when we were writing each other before this thing, Raphael, one of the things that you said that you kind of clarified today was just devil's advocacy, but really wondering questioning whether we have improved that much. Are the routes that are being done in the hardcore today any better than things that were being done in the 1980s?
I would guess not. That we're doing them faster, maybe freeing them, but in terms of sort of some absolute standard difficulty, the stuff that Barry, you were doing, the Cheeseman was doing, I'm not sure if those things were any less difficult, less committing than the things being done now. So maybe the range is tapped out. I don't know.
I don't think so, but I agree with that. I agree with that point, but what is it going to take for us to go that next level? That's what I think.
I think people are undeniably climbing technically better. I mean, we did the first ascent of the Andromeda strain, half of the crux took 5 hours to lead, and half of it was aid moves, free moves, weird funky mixed moves, and now it's commonly for one, it gets a lot of traffic, so all the snow mushrooms are cleaned out of it. That's a lot of time right there, chopping tens and tens and hundreds of pounds of snow from over your head, so it can fall down on your belayer. It's commonly done now, totally free. And the lead may take an hour. So people are climbing better. They're climbing better in the mountains, and mixed sport climbing, bolted climbing has had a lot to do with that. I think the way we use the pick has changed immensely because of that discipline. The pick of the ice axe on the rock and the cracks on the ice.
It seems like one of the climbs that a lot of people refer to as kind of the perfect example of that is Marco and Steve's route on Northwind. Can you kind of explain to the audience how what that was and how it may have been different or not from other things that have been done?
I think that's another one that, when I was there when Raph heard about the ascent, because, he was just up the street a block, and we came up and said, the boys just climbed this thing, and I remember Raph just said, that's the most important ascent in this range in 10 years. And it really was true in that, you have this place that George Lowe, who, in my opinion, George Lowe contributed every bit as much to the evolution of alpine climbing as Reinhold Messner did. And he said, he had done a route there in 1974 with Chris Jones, and then I was lucky enough to get up there with David Cheeseman in 85 and add a route to the face. They were both summer routes, huge rock wall, 5,000 feet of rock climbing, a lot of it overhanging. And Marco and Steve went there in April, which is full-on winter conditions, and blitzed up the lower part of the face, taking advantage of winter. And then for the first time in my life, I saw these images of these guys out on this immense sedimentary wall, kind of amphitheater wall of limestone, all vertical and black, and they're out there using the picks, dry tooling up the rock. I had never seen images like that anywhere else in climbing history. I look at a lot of slideshows and look at a lot of climbing history, and I was pretty blown away by it. So, anyways.
Well, maybe that's what will help push it too. We were talking earlier, the media is what pushes climbing, or if climbing pushes the media. But maybe these photos now getting out of people doing like what Barry's saying, instead of photos of people jamming up splitter cracks with good gear, maybe that'll get people stoked to come here and try hard.
Yeah. Rob, got a question here.
So I'm interested, I guess, maybe in talking to Barry a little bit about, or hearing what Barry has to say about maybe the work ethic and the acceptance of risk in today's, I guess the people on the younger people on the panel, and some of that, the list of names that you mentioned compared to what was being done in the 80s, because if you look at most of the big faces were all done, 70s and late 70s, early 80s, like North Twin and stuff, and sure, it's undeniable that we have way more technical skill as far as, especially in winter, for climbing some of this terrain, but it doesn't seem like we're necessarily going any faster, or if you look at Steve House's and Colin Haley's ascent of the Emperor Face, which I think is a pretty amazing ascent, but I think they maybe shaved one day off the the ascent that happened in the late 70s, or maybe it was the early 80s, but and then also Jim Logan had actually freed that pitch, I think, with gear that was also way more archaic than what we have now.
Yeah, I think the big difference between those two ascents right off the bat was one was basically a winter style ascent in May, where the mountains are still blanketed in snow and they're wearing winter, and the other one was in July, where it's full on summer and it's bare hands on dry rock for a lot of it. So I think there's differences that way, and I'll have to have someone else reply to the rest of the question because it's already out of my head.
Yeah, exactly.
But the reference was to young members of the panel, so that rules me out.
There's the question. Oh, my God.
I can't even remember either. Oh, right. Yeah. Acceptance of risk.
Yeah.
I definitely think that the 90s brought on the acceptance of risk was quite a bit lower, just because there was, roadside cragging and that kind of thing. And I think now it's been tapering off a little bit, and people are willing to throw themselves out into the gauntlet a little bit more. But I don't know what you guys think about that, but that's kind of what I've seen anyway. Yeah. I've
got to raise a little bit of a disturbing alarm in my mind. A couple of the routes that we've maybe talked to and alluded to here. One that's on the internet right now. Ice Porn, what is his first name? Polarity is his second name. They're climbing under and through seracs, and I think there's people can be called to question for that. And I've done it in the past myself. I did a route on Snowdome, climbed through a serac in '86, and that was the last time I climbed around seracs for going ice climbing. You traverse under them quickly in the mountains, but I think it's a good question to raise. That what is this about climbing through seracs? And talked to one of our buddies, Dave Mara. He's got a definite take on it, and that he was trying to climb through a serac on Mount Snowdome, and the serac, this big cliff of ice, calved off in terms of hundreds and hundreds of tons of material. He said it was the closest to any human beings come to living in the Matrix.
Yeah.
And it was a happy outcome, which is an absolute miracle. I don't know. The guy who was holding the rope is in the audience here, Tom, and I just would have never predicted that someone would come up smiling from something like that.
I know.
But he's also not climbing anymore, too, so I think...
I mean, I appreciate your point that it is there's a difference between objective hazard, like Seracs, where basically smart or stupid, you're just rolling the dice, and maybe hazard when you're running it out, and it's more within your control, maybe. Still, in the end, alpine climbing is about putting yourself in harm's way, and as such, you know, if the harm is Serac or loose rock, it is what it is.
Yeah, but some harm is just so overpowering. I mean, you know, a lot of Serac events you're gonna lose your life. That's it. But rock fall events, you know, a lot of those are survived with, you know, nothing more than a broken helmet, as flippant as that sounds. But yeah, I don't know. It's rolling way more dice. I don't know, putting way more cards in the hand of the casino rather than in your own hand.
By the way, I fully agree with you. Barry. I'm just being devil's advocate here.
Yeah, I actually think a lot of the bigger climbs in the Rockies that are the most serious of the bigger ones don't have that hazard, and so there's a differentiation between, you know, a grade 6 commitment in the Rockies that's under Seracs but roadside because, you know, the whole party is going to get wiped off the face, and then there's a grade 6 where you've got to hike in for 2 days and spend whatever 2 or 3 days on this peak and come out. So there is a differentiation there as well, I think.
Yeah.
You know.
Got another question over here.
I wanted to ask a question about a subject that we were or you guys were talking about earlier, which is, it seems to always come up that we're somehow trying to make progress, that so-and-so only did a route a day faster and there hasn't been a new route done. And yet a couple people on the panel mentioned that why we do this is for the adventure. So I can think of a few climbs I've done that haven't been new climbs or climbs I've tried that have been huge adventures. So why are we always trying to strive for some kind of new goal that we can report or it's better than what was done earlier?
I take it, Ian, you don't believe in the idea of progress.
Humans are a competitive lot. We love to, you know, compete with each other. But, you know, I got into alpine climbing because I wanted to experience some of the things that Walter Bonatti had experienced and written about. And I was just so excited to finally realize that I didn't have to travel to Europe to have those experiences, that I could have those experiences here in the Canadian Rockies. And, yeah, you know, the experience, I think, eventually is going to be what keeps you climbing mountains and keeps you going out there. If you're trying to just progress all the time and shave minutes and stuff, I don't know if you're going to stay with it.
I think Ian's point is actually an excellent one, that especially with the climbing media, sometimes you know, hot flashes and bullshit like that, it kind of drives this competition that you're trying to prove how you're better, faster, meaner, leaner than the previous person, and in the end, like Barry said, that's not what's going to keep you in climbing. If that's what drives you, you won't last very long just because you won't be having fun.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's easy to get caught up in the numbers game. You know I have, a lot of people do. But for me, it's going out and trying to find classic routes, whether they be new routes or even just doing established classics, especially new routes, going out and finding something that, you know, I remember when I first climbed the Becky going, God damn it, those guys, you know. I mean, there's nothing like this left. They found this classic route, you know, in the 70s, right? But there's lots of stuff like that out there and just going in.
61, wasn't it? Right? 61.
Wasn't even born yet. But just, yeah, I mean, the adventure part is what keeps you coming back, going looking around the next corner, trying to find that classic route that hasn't been done.
Yeah, and you don't have many of those experiences where you actually get on these things, and it's the camaraderie too that you have with the people that you're with, you know. And I don't have to worry about the media stuff because I'm not leaner. I'm fatter, right? So it's good. I think a lot of Rockies climbing has actually been focused around the fact that there's not a lot of media involved with it, and there's not that pressure. And I think that's also what makes this area quite special. You know?
Mm-hmm. But it sounds like it's a balance between a force that kind of holds you back and pushes you forward and makes it more pleasant, more motivating, more personally relevant to climb here, but might be holding people back a little bit.
I think so.
Yeah, another question here.
She was next if you wanted to go.
Okay.
Oh, ladies first, thank you very much. It occurred to me as you were talking about how difficult it is climbing in the Rockies, that in fact it spawned a very, very qualified group of guides. And I've had the privilege of being guided by Barry and Steve, and we're going to go out again. But really, they are the top in the world, the ACMG, the Association of Canadian Mountain Guides. And if you are not from this area, I encourage you to hire them. They are not only... I'm not being paid.
So are you visiting European climbers? Christoph, our rates are really good.
That's why for going climbing tomorrow, I'm trying to recruit Steve to come along.
But as a client, I will go with no other. We take Steve and Barry and other Canadian guides overseas as well, because I will not climb with anyone unless they are ACMG. Not only are they proven, I trust them. I have to come home for my daughter, and I know that I will, and they have gotten me to places I had no idea I could get to. And when I didn't believe in myself, they believed in me and got me there. And they are affordable. So I
Raise the rates. And they're also very handsome. Did you mention that?
very good looking. And if you're from overseas, there's a bit of a premium, being Canadian and the strength of a dollar, we get a good rate. But quite honestly, they really are the best in the world. And I would just say that if that training ground is the Rockies and the Columbia Mountains, then that's really impressive, because my friend Kevin, who's 70 years old, and he's a British climber, and he's come out here a few times, and he said, nowhere else in the world will you be treated so well by Canadian guides. They're patient, they're qualified, they're technically very, and he said, and they're good people, they're quality people. So,
Okay, Margaret. I don't know if you met Margaret, she's the president of the ACMG. Yeah, question here.
There's a saying
You're
about
hired.
City. If you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. And that's a saying that has gone through my mind as I've been climbing in the Rockies, that, hey, if I can climb it here, maybe I can climb it anywhere. It seems like you all reinforce that statement. And I'm wondering if all joking aside, do you really feel that way? You all have a lot of international experience. And setting altitude aside, because that adds a different element to it, but just the technical nature of the climbing here. Would you, in all truthfulness, do you believe that that's the case?
I'd have to say yes, because I've climbed other places and haven't been able to get up big stuff here. So.
Yeah, I think if you become proficient with technical routes in the Rockies, you'll find you've got a good handle on what's required to alpine climb in other ranges in the world. But as you said, the caveat would be altitude. It's not a real high altitude range. Mount Robson is just under 13,000 feet, which is is high enough to have some altitude challenges, but it's not the Himalaya or Karakoram or the Andes. That's a whole different set of challenges.
Maybe because they're not so high, they don't get that attention. But I think, the faces here, some of the big faces, Robson and those, the south face is 3,000 meters high. I mean, they do compare with other ranges that way. But just the complexity of climbing here, I've found has been quite difficult. You go to a place like Peru, a lot of the faces aren't as big. They're quite dangerous, some of them. But you can take a taxi there. You can right, and you have burrows to take your stuff in, and I like it, but it's different, right? So,
Yeah, one more question here, and then we'll wrap
You bring
up.
up another point that I was thinking about and we've been talking about what it would take to expand alpinism here in the Canadian Rockies. Is infrastructure an issue? So, for instance, you got the arrieros in Peru, or the taxis to the base camps, and you've got the Sherpas in Nepal, and you've got all these cultures that are basically around the mountain culture and supporting climbers like you all to do these amazing expeditions. And is that something that's holding back some of these kind of longer, deeper, greater investment type of, in terms of time and money achievements here?
I think there's enough accessibility. I wouldn't want to see any more accessibility. Places like Robson are actually quite accessible via helicopter. It's great that the national parks, you can't use a helicopter, in my opinion. I think if anything's holding us back, it's Glenn not sharing his photos. Quite honestly. I mean, I was looking at trying to figure out a new line on the east face of Assiniboine recently, and I could not find a picture, like a straight-on picture of the east face of Mount Assiniboine.
I found one.
And I know, you. I know Glenn's sitting on 100 of them. So.
Yeah.
You know, I think the point of this this whole conversation today is to really, you know, if there are people from the rest of the world listening to this conversation today, to you know, maybe think about their own area too. But the truth underlying all of this, I think, is that sometimes the grass isn't always greener elsewhere. And I think these guys have done a great job of kind of showing you their love for this place, and really how, you know, a place such as this doesn't have to be 8,000-meter peaks. It doesn't have to be someplace that everybody knows about, but there are hidden gems everywhere in the mountains. And I just really want to thank these guys and thank you guys for coming as well. Thank you.